Ooh, jeez. This isn't gonna work. So I may have actually got here on false pretenses because I'm not going to actually eat any cheese. It's just generic no-name brand cheese, so it's not that exciting. What I do have that is probably much more interesting is flour. And the reason this is interesting is because there seems to be flour out there. Now, back in the early days of this entire lockdown situation, everyone was buying rice, flour, toilet paper. That never made any sense, but all the staples. So only recently we've been able to get back full supply, and it's not because we don't have any flour. It's because most people didn't buy that much flour anyway, and manufacturing was not set up to build packets like this. I mean, this is 5 kilos. This is a large bag of flour. Most people buy them in 2 or even 1 kilo lots. So simply the production capacity wasn't there. Now that's come back and people have discovered the joys of baking, or more how much of a pain it can be, so probably consumption has decreased. The thing that, however, is not seemingly to be available is yeast. I haven't got that problem because I've got my own yeast and I do random things. But for those of you, let's get this out of the way. If you're trying to bake bread, you've got options of, you've got flour. Consider quick breads, muffins and other chemically leavened things. They're delicious and they're quick, hence the name, quick bread, and you don't need yeast for it. The other thing you can do is head to your local bakery, and most good bakeries would be more than happy just to slice off a bit of their yeast cake and sell it to you. Just like, here's a $5, give us some yeast and a croissant while we're here. That's not a problem. So go in and check your local bakery. But if you're still interested, this is what I look at. Let's move this to one side. So in terms of yeast, I, for various reasons, have a huge amount of the stuff floating about. So I have this guy, which looks like a sourdough starter, which it is a sourdough starter. It, however, was not completely wild yeast based. It was captured from, it's been contaminated as heck by now. It's now, I don't know how old it is, but I keep making bread from it, taking a piece of the old dough, putting it back in, regrowing it, etc., etc., etc. I also have this. This is a Fleischmann's Quick Rise yeast. Now, one thing to note about this is this bottle is basically half full still, and it has an expiry date telling me that I should probably keep it cold December the 2nd, 2019. It's not gonna go off the way I use it, so there's that. I also have these guys here. So those of you who are brewers will probably recognize these two. I have the classic US 05 and here a cheeky little Belgian, Safal BE134. These are also yeasts from the same family. I don't know how to pronounce it. Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Same rough family, so they'll all do the same thing. They'll chow down on sugars, they'll create carbon dioxide, they'll create alcohol, more alcohol in the case of these guys, and they will leaven your product. You may also have other things floating about, such as this, red yeast rice. Now, it is a yeast in that it's a fungus, it's a yeast, but this, however, is not from the same family as these guys. This is Monascus purpureus. I did a test the other night, ground up some of this, put it with flour, and did nothing. Now, the reason I have this and some other stuff in the fridge is because I will be using or experimenting with these things in order to crack the starches of the rice or the other starches I'm using to brew, crack them, turn them into sugars, and then allow these guys to go and ferment it and transform it into alcohol or other things. So this, we'll put it back to one side. Now, questions, of course, have arisen about what is the difference between all these things. This is probably not a good control item because it is commercial yeast plus whatever contamination, and it's not a very pure strain. It's got a bunch of other bacterias and things in it that make it tasty and delicious. So we'll put that to one side. These remaining three, on the other hand, are fairly pure cultures. So it'd be interesting to see what's the difference in flavor, which is harder to communicate over camera, but also, more importantly, for someone like me who's trying to bake on a schedule and, do it in between Zoom meetings and doing code reviews and PRs and stuff, is how fast do these guys rise, and can I make a baking schedule around them? So in order to test that, we're going to roast some yeast. You're going to get a couple of these jars, going to get some of the flour, which we have prepared earlier, and going to turn up about a 100% hydration dose, so equal parts water and flour. Then we're going to put a tiny amount of each of these 3 yeasts in, chuck them in, and set up the camera to do some time lapse. So yeah, quarantine. We're no longer watching live football or anything on TV. We're racing yeast. Well, let's see what happens. Starting from the left to the right, we have the control, which is just plain old flour, Fleischmann's dry yeast, the USO5, and the B134. This is probably going to be a bit of a boring segment of it, but I've only put in about a 1/16 of a teaspoon of yeast into each jar, and we're just waiting. You'll notice about now, which is I'd say 6 hours into the time lapse, that bubbles are starting to appear in all 3 of the yeasted jars. And while it's not that interesting initially, you'll actually see about now, which is I think 9 to 10 hours in, them bubbling and being quite active. There is also a noticeable difference in yeast growth between the middle 2, which are effectively equivalent as far as I can tell, and the Belgian on the far right. Now, they do actually smell different, but after making a loaf of bread from all 3 of them, there was not a huge amount different in flavor or aroma once cooked. This will probably be different if you had more of it, but yeah, it's yeast racing.